Next up, I would like to invite up to the stage Dr. Carl Spetzler. Um, Carl has been a mentor to me for a long time. He's a pioneer in this field. There's not enough I could say about Carl. Carl's chairman of Strategic Decisions Group. He's been an innovator and leader in application of decision science for decades. He's a recipient of the Ramsey Medal, the DA Society, the Pioneer Award of SDP, and was inducted into the SRI Hall of Fame for his contributions to the world of financial services. And Carl's going to give his talk on the fundamentals of DQ and how did we get here. Carl, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. And hearing Ellen and her enthusiasm of what I call a DQ champion, that happened for me early in my career. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But there's magic in what we do. The magic of a better decision creates value out of nothing. And if the better decision doesn't happen, it becomes a lost opportunity. So turning opportunity loss potential into real value, that's what we help people do. Now, the decision isn't usually ours. There's a decision maker who has that opportunity. But we're the ones often that help bring that magic there to get that lift. There's one more thing I want to say right at the beginning. Decision-making does not create the value. It's a means to the end of creating value. Without really appreciating and valuing the execution, you will create enemies among the executors by claiming that you created the value in the decision when they do the hard work. Okay? And I've seen that in organizations where they don't make the full connection between making a better choice and getting it done. So right from the beginning, we want to really recognize our role as this magic, but it's only a means to the end of what we really want. And I'm going to tell you about this in a little personal way, okay? In fact, we started SDG in 1981, and when we celebrated our 40th anniversary a couple of years ago, people asked me to talk about this, and so I've built, we had an internal webinar, and a lot of the slides here come out of that. So I just want to recognize that so they sound a little bit more like SDG, okay, than they do just the whole field. And the basic thing I was telling them at that time is that SDG played a major role in what we now have. Okay? And let's talk first a little bit about what we have in the field today. So this whole field, by the way, is built on the shoulders of giants. Okay? And people like Bayes and Bernoulli and Laplace. And all of this stuff went on for a long time, and it was all part of, I don't know how people in the 1600s had so much time playing cards and games and being mathematicians, but they were trying to figure out how to play card games correctly, mathematically with probability and all of that. And out of that, the next thing came and the next thing. And by 1964, this was all relatively as a structure of how you should make a decision theoretically correctly, what we call decision theory, that was in place and was already 250 years old. Okay? And then there were a couple of people that said, well, why don't we really do that? Why is it just a branch of philosophy and mathematics? Why don't we really apply that to decision making? And that's what leads us to today. Okay? what's in it? And first of all, there is a definition of decision quality. There's a separation between decision and outcome, the fundamental. We need to be able to make a decision at the time, and we have to know the quality of a decision at the time we make it, not with hindsight, okay? So that separates decisions and outcomes. And we have to know what a good decision is. We have to know how to get to that place. That's processes, and there are rapid processes and dialogue processes and so on. But how to get there, in my view, is secondary to knowing when we're there. What are the requirements of a quality decision? That's what everybody should be learning and have in their back pocket and use all the time. Okay? And then in getting to decision quality, that point where we have a decision that meets the requirements, there are a lot of pitfalls. And most of them come between the way we're wired or the way we interact with other people, both psychology and social psychology. Okay? That is, we're influenced by all kinds of things. There are lots of books written. It's become very popular in the last 30 years, 40 years. Okay? And having the fundamental understanding of that for us to avoid it. Okay? Most of this psychology and social psychology is taught in marketing and political science to manipulate other people's decisions. Okay? We teach it to avoid those kinds of, I call them potholes, but some of these potholes are like huge. Confirming evidence bias is so fundamental that we create schisms in the political world, okay? And everybody just reads and attends to the thing they want to believe, and so on. It's just huge. So these are fundamental. Becoming familiar with the most useful tools. A key to decision quality and decision professionals is that they're focused on the decision situation. They have tools, but they don't come with their tools. They come with an intention to understand the frame, the decision problem, and solve the true problem. And it'll take you sometimes to searching for data. Sometimes it'll take you to alternative generation and creativity. Sometimes it's much more conflict resolution, whatever the real problem is. So this real problem focus is very fundamental to our positioning of what we do. And then there's one more thing. If you have all that and you can do it well, then you want to do it at an organizational level, and you actually also want to design organizational decision processes and governance processes and how we make decisions around here organizationally, so it becomes an organizational competence, not just an individual competence. And that includes creating what we call a healthy decision culture. Okay? The healthy decision culture is not the whole organizational culture, but how we make decisions around here has a huge impact on the total organizational culture. Can I have my glass of water? Okay, thank you. And so that's what's in there. I've tried to write that up in that book, and I want to mention the dedication. We dedicated it to the many DQ champions, of which we have a number in the room, I know, okay? And I'm one, who share the passion for making the common sense of decision quality truly common. It is all common sense. The most common criticism I get after I give an executive education, a couple hours, from one of the key executives in the room is they'll sit back and say, well, isn't this just common sense? And I say, isn't it lucky that it is? And then I say, are you applying that level of common sense to your decisions all the time? Then they have to say no. And I have to say, why not? Okay, and I usually have them then. in an engaged way because I've had people say, I don't want to. And I say, well, which one of these criteria for a decision don't you want to meet in your decisions? I don't want to have the frame right. That means you're solving the wrong problem. No, that won't work. How about I don't want to have the best, choose among the best alternatives? No? Okay. Well, you cannot argue with the 6 requirements of decision quality. They are fundamental, and I'll show you how they get built up, but you can't argue with it. So in that case, you got people to want to say it's common sense, but it's not common. And the fact is, our human mind is not wired to do it that way. Okay? We're not wired to do a lot of things. We're not wired to fly. But we fly a lot. I flew out here. Okay? How do we do that? Well, we augment our human competencies in different ways to overcome our limitations. And decision quality overcomes our natural limitation of not really making decisions to that standard. Okay? So, we today solve problems that are both organizationally complex and analytically complex. We go wherever it takes us, okay? And at SDG, for a long time, we used to organize our knowledge into theoretical foundation, best practice methodologies, and tools, and we had a lot of things in there, okay? And at the foundation, this like psychology of judgment and decision-making, decision theory, and so on, what we considered fundamental, okay? But every decision problem, you only use some. Okay? And you become an effective decision professional if you have if you're in the comfort zone of saying, I will tackle the problem, whatever it is. And if I don't know, if I don't have the skill, this gets into probabilistic modeling of a type that I don't have the special skill for, I'll reach out for the skill. You got to have the humility to being willing to reach out for wherever the problem takes you and be problem focused. That's our true role here, okay? This has grown for many years, the profession. I call the beginning in 1964 with the paper that Ron Howard wrote, which was decision analysis, applied decision theory, okay? And prior to that, there was already quite a bit of bubbling going on, and that bubbling was called statistical decision theory. And it was a lot of debate of whether we should be Bayesians and subjective decision theorists versus the classical statistical approaches. In some of our early seminars in like end of the 60s, early 70s, some people would storm out of the room when we would talk about subjective probability. It was a big controversy. Today, that's pretty well gone. And I think Bayesian methods and subjective probability is a fundamental way of thinking when you're thinking forward in unique situations. It's been widely accepted, okay? It's fundamental to our field. We couldn't tackle unique decision problems with uncertainty if we didn't accept that fundamental subjective philosophy of that uncertainty can be talked about and quantified with probability, but all it expresses is our judgment about the future. So we can talk about that China will be very successful in overcoming its demographics, which are a horror, right? What's the chance of them solving that problem in a way without having a big change? We can talk about that. I don't know that we can get it out of data. Well, maybe we can learn a lot by looking at the past, but ultimately it's going to be leading to using judgment, but you can put precise language on that judgment with probability. So it's just a precise language for expressing our judgment of uncertainty. But once we have that precise language, then there are all these methods and mathematics and thick books with Russian names like Kolmogorov, okay, and Chebyshev and so on, that is the mathematics of uncertainty, as long as we're careful in expressing our points of view with uncertainty. Okay? That's the breakthrough of statistical decision theory, turning it into what was called decision analysis, then was this very pragmatic engineering approach that Ron Howard brought to it. Okay? And at the same time, Howard Rafa was at Harvard generating the ideas and applying them in the business school to cases. Okay? So those are some of the things. So I'll talk a little bit about the early days. And the early days started in the 60s. The conception of decision science came from the very fundamental that was already this decision theory that's been around for 250 years, which is you can separate the inputs into what you could do, this is under your control, what you can know and believe about the future, okay, that's the information, but you can't change, okay, it's not under your control, and what you want. And if you express these three in a very fundamental way, then excuse me. There's a back to this. So then if you have that, you have the logic to be able to put it together in a systematic way. That derives the decision, and then that decision, once it's made, leads to an outcome, okay? That's the fundamental, that's the science part. At that time, in 1960s, this was the subjective decision theory, and we thought our job as a decision analyst was to elicit what the decision maker believed. Not us to work with them and improve it. When Ellen explained this, we work on this, okay, together to help them get better beliefs. Today, the decision makers ask us for what should we put in there, okay, and get that. But at that time, we thought our job was to not interfere, but to elicit what did they really believe. And that got challenged by Tversky and Kahneman and Edwards early on in the 70s. Okay? And I had the great pleasure to work with them, and they were brilliant, okay? Right away with asking all these questions of people and demonstrating that people do not think straight about what they should believe. Well, we found that, in fact, we could apply analytics and create clarity for people based on what you believe, what you want, and what you can do. Here's what you should do. It'll get the most of what you want. And we added clarity and logic. That was the initial conception of decision analysis. Okay? Ron Howard and Jim Matheson, I saw Jim around, so he's here. Ron Howard, I visited a week ago. He is in a continuing care facility now. And they together created what they thought of as the teaching hospital in 1966. So Ron Howard had kind of come up with this, and Jim was an early friend and got right in there. And they said, But this has to be practiced. We can't just do it in the classroom and in theory. It's not just an academic subject. So SRI at that time was owned by Stanford and was later spun off during the student demonstrations from the Vietnam War. But they started that. I joined them in '68. And what it was, this application of decision theory, we had already the iteration, the idea of a decision analysis cycle. You first go through, get a solution, a trial solution. You use value of information to figure out whether you need to do more and cycle more and before you go and make your final decision. Okay? It was a very already clear in the conception. We had trees, we had tornadoes. We didn't draw them as tornadoes. They were just lists. Probability encoding methodology of how you extract probability statements from people and test them was big. I wrote some papers on that. Financial models. Oh, our models were done in timeshare, which was a terminal. The real computer was a GE somewhere. And it took us 3 months to build it, and it was on punch paper tape to be able to predict the consequences of things. Most of our efforts in those days went into this logic part. Okay? Today, we do the same model in 2 days. Okay? It's the methodology and the tools have gone up very quickly. And we were amazed. We could solve significant decision problems and were successful with it. And we weren't consultants starting out. We were really people that wanted to apply this new idea, okay? And we thought it would take the world by storm. We thought by now every child and every person would be speaking this language and using it long ago, okay? And this decision analysis group at SRI did very well. I left in 1980, and then some of the other people followed. We kept losing our best staff. At that time, I had about 140 people at SRI, and people would come in and they'd apologize and they say, Carl, I really like it here and everything, but I took this job for twice the money at McKinsey. And I got tired of that. I said, I want to hold on to our best, and I can't do it here because SRI was mainly a scientific research, more consulting type organization, not a big consulting company. And so we left, and I attracted some of those people into Strategic Decisions Group, and that was formed in '81. So teaching and executive seminars were already part of the equation, okay? And give you a man, we love this statement. If a man will begin with certainties, he will end it with doubts. But if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. Isn't that's what we do so much, okay? And we, at that time, our product was to help people reach clarity in complex, uncertain situations, okay? I did my first one even before I joined the SRI group in Chicago. That was that Amoco case. I'll actually talk about that this afternoon. We gave workshops inside Exxon. Arco at Capen might be a name that some people remember. He became a big champion and got into it. We had many seminar attendees around the world. It was a new thing, and people wanted to hear about it. Okay? And here was one of the statements from a customer of that SRI group. Okay? The final chapter to the olefins plant case is that the decision analysis led us to change our minds. We had preconceived notions. In the end, we decided to build a larger plant to choose a different plant site, and to build a plant based on different feedstock. Even those in our midst who originally thought there was no need for decision analysis agreed we came up with a much better decision using this approach. And then he referred to this. We had begun in doubt. With the help of decision analysis, we ended in certainty, the certainty of having made a good decision. Thus, if you feel, as I do, that good decisions are more often than not followed by good outcomes, this guy even understood the difference very well, okay? You should not hesitate to use decision analysis where the outcome is important. And that is William Rohrer, who was at that time the president of Gulf Oil Chemicals. So that's really phase one. Clarity, okay, and primarily the logic of making a good decision. So next, we're now in 84, decision quality gets invented, okay? And what do we mean with decision quality? Decision analysis is clarity in complex situations, okay? Here's the story. So one of our primary clients had been Myron Tribus. Myron Tribus had been the Dean of Engineering at Dartmouth. He had been Undersecretary of State for Commerce. He had become a senior vice president at Xerox, and big client, particularly for me, okay? And after we had started SDG in 1981, he came to give us a talk. And here's a guy that really knows our field, that even wrote a book within our field, okay? And is a big user of it. And he says, decision analysis, not important. You guys are all barking up the wrong tree. It's all about Deming and decision quality. And he'd become an advocate of Deming and was giving seminars. And this was also at about the time where the Japanese are winning the game. Okay, total quality management, they're beating our various industries, and Deming had brought them this skill of quality and came back to the US. At the same time, an article comes out by a guy named Walter Kiesel, who was the chief editor at Fortune at that time, that says strategy is dead. We just formed a strategy consulting firm. Okay? And the theme in a lot of this stuff is the customer's always right. You got to really truly understand the customer. Whatever they say, that's the truth. Well, I went out and tried to understand. And I recalled where one president of a company, where we had done a decision analysis, at the end, he calls me in his office and he says, so Carl, what do you really think? And I said, well, if you have these alternatives and you believe these things will happen, and this is what you want, this is the right answer. He says, Carl, you're not listening to me. He says, what do you really think? And I tried one more time to wiggle out of it, because I had this professional conviction that's not my job. I can't do that. I'm violating my oath of decision professional. Almost, okay? Did you get the idea? But ultimately, he said, I want to know what you think. And he said it this way. He says, look, you spent probably 200 hours on this problem. I'm going to spend 2 or 3. I've gotten to know you. You're a bright guy. I want to know what you think. Okay? And I said, well, if you really want to know, I think they're overestimating this by a factor of 2. I think they ignored this one alternative that we just couldn't get them to put on the table because it has these downsides. And this, He says, okay, that's what I wanted to know. I had a gut feeling that was the case. And it shook me to my core. Is that our job, to make sure there's quality in the input? Okay? Now, then I had another thing during this time, and I'm interviewing the president of a company where we had just finished a job 3 months ago. And I'm trying to, and he granted me this interview, and I wanted to know what does he think now about our work and so on. And at the time, this had been such a successful job that at the end of the presentation that we had made, 2 people stood up to try to take credit for it that were competitors in the organization. I mean, it was like, we really felt good about what we had done. And he says, well, Carl, if you really want to know what I think you guys are very good decision analysts. You're just not very good consultants. That was a hit right there, okay? And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you know, I've got our report. This whole thing went very well. I have it down in this lower drawer here, and I'm still feeling guilty that we haven't started on it. But if you guys had been really good consultants, we would have done it already. Here he's blaming me for when they were all in the room and they all agreed that they should do it, for not doing it. But the customer's always right. So that plane flight home, I said, we have to take on the responsibility that it's not about clarity, it's about commitment to action. Now, clarity is a big piece that helps us get there, but commitment to action is necessary, okay? Those 2 things that I just talked about ended up with a paradigm shift from DA to DQ. So DA was about reaching clarity in complex, usually analytically complex situations, and DQ suddenly added for us, we didn't just assess these things or elicit them, we co-created them. We took the responsibility for what in psychology they call constructing, okay? And we also added the framing as a much more explicit thing that we had understood, and we made it not just clarity, but a commitment to action. That addition, those additions, have withstood the test of the time for the last 30 years now, okay? And I've thought long and hard about what else could there be, and I haven't come up with it. I think what we now have as the 6 requirements of decision quality are necessary conditions, and together they make up a quality decision, okay, necessary and complete, and the weakest link defines the overall quality, okay? It's a system. You can't be without any of those things. That's the fundamental. And that's more fundamental than the process. So we still have people around that call decision quality, the whole framework, a structured decision making. Like that's very common that focuses on the process. Some people still want to call it decision analysis. I think that's still just a big piece of it. Decision quality has decision analysis within it and requires it. But if you want to go all the way to the framework, you need to add those other things, okay? And we have over time created checklists, and in one company, they wanted to have a rating sheet for the everyday decisions. If you have the rating sheet, you can go very quickly. And now a decision maker doesn't have to have a decision professional helping them all the time. They can say, are we there yet? That means they have to be able to judge, are we on the right side in all the 6 requirements? If not, what gaps do we need to fill before we make a decision, and how do we fill them? That's what I would call the most everyday thing that anybody can do, and people can learn in a few hours and can apply it to their lives, like Ellen said, okay? And I have many examples, and we can teach it to high school students, and we have been. That's the focus of like the Decision Education Foundation and some other things. So that was the definition of decision quality, and we also changed the process. The primary decision process in most companies, even if it's collaborative, they set up a team and they have a decision-making body or a decision maker, and the team does its work, and they develop a recommendation and they advocate it. The advocacy process does not allow for decision quality. It reinforces all the biases that are particularly social biases, okay? It means that the advocate is selling an answer. And anything that distracts from a win in that, and it's a win-lose situation. If they don't accept my recommendation, at least I lose face, but more likely bigger losses that go with that. So I'm selling. When somebody is selling you something, they're not trying to help you to understand alternatives. They're not trying to help you understand information that would be disconfirming of their position. In fact, you can't get there in an advocacy process to decision quality. But it's the most common process. Okay? Now, advocacy approval is needed. Just don't confuse yourself with thinking that it inspects quality into the decision. You shouldn't get into the advocacy process until you've reached a quality decision. So in a good organization, they'd always have a decision executive or someone that's responsible for assuring the quality of the decision, that we've met the 6 requirements. And you should be able to ask them and say, well, what alternatives did you consider? What was your frame and stuff like this, okay? But after they've come up with their best answer, there are likely to be 3 or 4 approval levels, sometimes all the way to the board. They can't have the time to go through looking at alternatives and frame and so on. So they can't own the quality of the decision, but they might want to be in this both informed and in the approval stuff, okay? So it's still key. But that approval process is a mess when it is believed to be the primary process for reaching quality decisions. Okay? Instead of that, I like the artistically Ellen's version of this even better. But in fact, the basic process of having it be a dialogue between decision maker, where if you agree on the alternatives before you have the evaluation, then the alternatives compete. It's not somebody selling you something. That the person that is the decision professional is on the side of the decision makers looking at which alternative is the best, okay? It's not a competition selling process, and it's a huge cultural change in an organization. That decision difference is huge, okay? And so that's really what I've given you is what I think was pretty well when we had the decision quality framework that has stood up, okay? After that, we got pretty much into the whole question of now what do we do organizationally? We had beyond decision analysis, it's still decision analysis, but now we have the full decision quality framework, okay? And that allowed us at SDG to keep working up in the organization. We used to work on product decisions. Now we worked on business groups and corporate strategy, and so it just kept going up and up in the applications. Okay? We recognize that these applications don't stand alone. There's a whole, and it usually is one, you can lay it out as alternatives to then a portfolio, okay, of what's our business portfolio. And then within that, there would be asset strategies or business strategies, and then within that would be portfolios, okay? So it kind of alternates between the, what we call one-of-a-kind decision to portfolio decisions. They're nested, they are interrelated, you need to understand how they tie together. You make a decision up here, and many times the commitment to action is a policy that shapes the next set of decisions, but it's not by itself yet actionable, okay? It's, yes, let's say for example, you Illinois Tech, you guys are wanting to really adopt and create a center for decision quality, okay? That was a one-off decision at the high level up here. Within that, what's the portfolio that goes into that would be a next level decision and design decision. Within that, there would be strategies of everything like that. So it cascades down. Okay? We got into this holistic value creation. So decision quality was generally applied in this part. But if you want to be truly value-driven, you want to deliver the value, and that means the execution has to be a big part of it, okay? And you have to be clear about what decisions you need to make in the first place, which is defining your, what we call a strategic agenda. So from what we wanted to do now is to make this the most in the shortest time we could do for clients. Okay? That's the whole package. And if you think about that package, this left side is pretty small. It's like the rudder on a ship. It does a big thing, but relatively small on the whole thing. Okay? And with that inside, we started working on organizational decision quality. That's next. So now I've given you what is decision quality, okay? And we're going to move to, okay, if I want to make that a way of life on my whole organization, what does it have to be like? Okay. An organization has decision quality when everybody does it. It becomes second nature. Everybody understands their roles and has the skills that are for them. They do it well, efficiently, and they're aligned around decision quality in a healthy culture. By the way, not everybody likes this, okay? There's some people that want to lead with fear. That means I don't want to be transparent. I want to have you off base all the time, okay? I want you sucking up to me rather than confronting me with a different opinion. Okay, so in those organizations, decision quality as an organizational competence doesn't fly. Now, I've had clients like that, and they use it strictly for fighting the internal battles better than the other guy. It still is helpful to them to have decision quality on their decisions to shoot down the other guy that they're competing with, but it doesn't become an organizational competence or a culture. And you continuously learn to improve decision quality. There is a concept of organizational congruence that was hot in the 90s, and it really still fits, okay? I don't hear it as much today as a word, but it's really when all the parts of an organization reinforce each other philosophically and in habit. And you can walk into an organization that has that congruence and you can feel it. It's like when you walk into a family and you can feel it's a healthy family, okay? A healthy family can be a noisy family, or it could be a very introverted family. They're very different, one to the next, but that there's a mutual reinforcement of all the parts that are working. And that's where you'd like to get to with this reaching organizational decision quality. That means you have to work on the decision culture. And the decision culture has huge impact. Whenever I've dealt with organizations that say, hey, if you could make this a healthy decision culture, and to do that, you often want to say, okay, what goes in? We've defined what it takes to reach organizational decision quality. It's this healthy decision culture. It's successful applications you can point to. It's making the internal decision processes and governance consistent with DQ. It's building the capability of the decision makers, okay, for them to recognize and be able to speak the language, and having internal decision professionals that allow you to keep all that and support it and train it. And if you do that, you get organizational decision quality. That means you're really doing it because it's part of your DNA, and you have the capabilities to fulfill that. So I want to just say a couple of words about some big adoptions, and in particular Chevron. So Chevron had, because of Dave O'Reilly, who had become CEO in 2000, had adopted decision quality on all their large-scale capital stuff, anything that was, I think, over 50 million. And in that era, they were spending 40 billion a year. Okay, so a lot of big decisions. And we had helped them in the 90s. By that time, they were on their own. They had a very strong internal group and so on. Well, they invited me to talk to them, and at that time, I was on a kick of trying to find out and figure out what's the ROI of investing in decision quality. Okay? And I tried to figure it out, and by now it was 2011. I figured, and O'Reilly had retired recently, and I said, okay, so was it any good? What difference did it make? And I'll skip this. I'll come back to that, okay? I asked, what's the difference? George Kirkland had recently spoken about it. He was vice chairman. And I asked Larry Neal and Frank Cook, who at that time were two out of the three internal champions that were really got the credit for transforming Chevron, okay? And here's what Larry said, okay? As far as your question on dollars, I wouldn't know where to start. This is, I think, like 2011, 12. I would certainly be in excess of 100 billion over 20 years, but I don't think money is the real answer here. So what would you miss most? He basically says framing. Okay? And framing was one of the big things. And while the large studies get this, but basically they didn't want to talk about ROI. Okay? And when I asked Frank Cook, he says, quantifying DA benefits has always been a challenge to me, in part because you need to make assumptions about what you would have done if you didn't do it. Okay, that's obviously. There are anecdotal examples and so on. And basically, it's huge, and framing is very important. And in terms of benefit and cost ratios, it doesn't really cost you more, so the value is infinite. I was very frustrated. I couldn't get it. And people kept asking, well, what's the benefit? Cost ratio. Okay? And so I looked at their stock chart and compared it to their competitors. Now, this is something that they published in one of their shareholder meetings. Okay? You got to remember that these companies over here, this is 10 years, these companies over here are no slouches. This is Exxon. This is Shell. I think this was Total. Okay? The minus was BP because of the Macondo disaster, where they lost 2/3 of their shareholder value as a company, okay? So this is probably the most capital decision-intensive industry there is, okay? So I wrote this paper of Chevron overcomes the biggest bias of all. And it's been something that's hung around. But when I was in this, during that time, they invited me to talk to their internal group, and they had a group of maybe 90 people together of all decision analysts and so on. And I asked them, so is this difference due to decision quality or execution? And they fought back and says, there's a piece that you're missing, which is the Chevron way. And I said, what do you mean with that? And he says, well, the transparency, the involvement, the openness. There were lots of characteristics that we would want in a healthy decision culture already built into the Chevron way, okay? And ultimately, they said, these two things, much more, and this is a little bit, okay? So out of that came a confirming of the value. We've done other things where we kept track of lots of outcomes compared to what was, and the overall value was so big that it didn't, decision quality is huge. But if you don't have it connected to execution, it's nothing, okay? So what you have to do is it's the ROI of the value potential, not the value delivered. And you gotta make sure that you give full credit to the execution to get the delivery. And the thought leadership that was created has been going on with continuing learning what we see here. This was our original chart when we formed STP, okay? And we have a field where at the center is this normative decision theory, and prescriptive, what we do, help people make better decisions, how we should make decisions. Descriptive, which is what people do. There's a single decision maker, there's multi-party, and these are actually different academic fields. There are thought leaders in them, okay? And you have people getting Nobel Prizes in '78. Herb Simon got the first one. Satisficing and how organizations behave around decision making. The Nobel Prize went to Kahneman in 2002. Tversky, who I think was even more brilliant, died in '96. We have Ron Howard, and Howard Rafa started over here and then went over here, and his key work that people should look at, if you haven't seen it, is negotiation analysis. Okay? He kind of went to the multi-party world, and I think that's a really complex world. Okay? So there are lots of good additional stuff. I kind of concentrated on some of the stuff I was closer to personally as it has grown. And we take this whole field that is behavioral and we push it towards and use it for avoiding biases and making it so it's a big piece of what we do. And everything that goes with this field, as it goes more and more, and someday I hope to have make sense in political decisions. That would be the ultimate, okay? That we actually separate preferences. I'd like my elected officials represent my preferences, not administrators that are unelected. And I want experts to predict consequences, not make decisions on society's behalf, okay? And so on. So if you just simply separating and having processes that do the right thing would get us out of some of the messes we're in, okay? Because we don't really apply good reasoning to our controversial issues. And so that's where we've been, and SDG made a contribution to that. But what I wanted to do is use this as a platform to get you to understand what is decision quality and how we got to where we are. Okay? Thank you very much.